Just some quick extra bio. I am a husband to my wife, Rebecca, and I have 3 kids. I'm based in Durham. I am a visual communicator. I started out as a photojournalist and grew into video, and I love all kinds of platforms. I am the founder of Story Driven, which is a video storytelling firm. I love storytelling, not just telling stories, but kind of geeking out on the science of stories, why they work, how do you create tension, all those kind of things. You'll see from this presentation, I love plants. You can see some of my plants in the background. I don't always keep them all alive, but I try. And one of the things that I discovered maybe in the last 5 or 10 years is I really have an entrepreneurial spirit that's been there since the early days. When I remember when I was in 5th grade, I found a market for paper clips and was selling paper clips to my classmates somehow. That lasted until the teacher discovered that she was my supplier and I wasn't paying her. So that didn't work out very long. But I say spirit because I'm not necessarily an entrepreneur who just comes up with ideas and then, has all this amazing business sense. As you can see from my first business, didn't last very long. But I do have the spirit in the sense of I'm not afraid to jump in and try something and just kind of figure it out along the way, which is what entrepreneurs have to do. And for most of the time, that has worked out great in my life. I've just jumped in and figured it out. And I say most of the time because sometimes it hasn't worked out. So I want to tell you about the twins. So I've always been fascinated with twins. I mean, I don't know who isn't. It's really interesting to see identical twins. And I actually dated twins for 2 years, not both of them. I dated one girl. It felt like I was dating twins because they were so close, and I became friends, really close friends with the twin I wasn't dating. And so anyway, I just had a fascination. And so my wife and I even, wonder if maybe we'll have twins, and that would be great. But that hasn't, obviously we can't control that, and we'll see. But when I had the opportunity to photograph newborn twins, I said, yes, definitely. My entrepreneurial spirit led me straight into that. Had I done it before? No. Had I photographed any newborns before? No. But that didn't stop me. I Googled it, just like anyone else would do. And I learned 2 things. One, you need to come between 0 and 10 days of life. That's when they're quiet and they don't wake up, and you can pose them in cute little sleepy poses. Number 2, you probably want to bring a heating pad to keep them warm, because if they get cold while they're naked on the blanket, then they're going to wake up and then it's going to ruin the shoot. So I was prepared. I did show up on day 10 though, because we had some scheduling conflicts or whatever. So we weren't able to get there until day 10. But I showed up. We set up the pad, we set up the blankets, found good light by a window. We started, and a little ways into it, they just started to wake up. And the parents were like, this is weird. Literally, they've been sleeping for 10 days and they just woke up. And so they started fussing and crying. At one point I looked over, and one of the babies that was on the heating pad turned red, like bright red from just straight down the middle. It was like half and half. The side that they were laying down was just bright red. It didn't go away when they picked him up, for a while. Basically, the whole shoot fell apart. I think maybe there was one photo of hundreds that I ended up taking that worked. And I walked out going, they're going to sue me for turning their baby red. And this was an epic failure. And I felt terrible. I don't like failure. I really, I felt bad. In fact, I went back a year later and did a photo shoot for them for free as the kids were running around 1-year-old, and we went out in a pumpkin patch, and it was all great. But I really don't like failure. And that has driven me in a lot of ways to this idea of pursuing excellence, and always wanting to do something to the best of my ability and really knock it out. So that's what killed me about that twins shoot, is it wasn't excellent. It was terrible. As I've grown in my career in visual arts, I've learned about excellence, and excellence has a lot of demands. In pursuing excellence, it is something that doesn't want constraints. In its purest form, I think about an artist who has an idea, a vision, something that is inside of them. It's part of who they are. It's part of their ego. It's part of their self-expression to bring that idea out into the world. And so to do that with excellence means no constraints. I don't want someone else telling me what that idea needs to become. I don't need someone else telling me, what it can or cannot be. So in its purest form, excellence demands purity. It's kind of a pipe dream, I think, for most artists. We see those portraits of painters or sculptors who have done their thing. But, in the real world, for most of us, that's not a reality, right? We don't have the chance to just create as we want to without any constraints. And if we did, we might still just be struggling along to make a living, and it might be hurting. In fact, this was something that my parents brought up when I was an undergrad. I wanted to study fine arts, and I wanted to do photography and all the studio arts, painting, sculpting. And, they said, your uncle is an artist and he's basically a starving artist. We don't want you to become like that. So why don't you do something more practical? So I ended up majoring in philosophy because I know a lot of very wealthy philosophers. Just kidding. Actually, philosophy ended up being a great field for me. I think I am actually more of a philosopher than I realized until recently. But I also realized that, my uncle, that's one way to pursue it. And he loves being poor. He doesn't want to have money. He doesn't own a car. He doesn't own a house. He doesn't want to. That's his life. He's super talented, and he is actually living the life he wants. But that's one way to pursue art, is through this kind of starving artist. Maybe you're going to make it not, but there's other ways. And so the other way is to involve bringing in a client. So, and that means service, right? So you bring in a client who needs your help to do something. They have the money to help you achieve your goals, which is making a living. And you help them by helping them achieve what it is that they need to achieve. And so when you think about service, going back to other jobs I've had, most of you maybe have waited tables at some point. That's one really clear service industry job. And in the service industry, you learn that the client is always right? The customer is always right. Service is, so we have excellence on one spectrum. Service on the other side is not about the ego. It's not about you. It's about them. It's about what experience do they want to have during this date. Some of the best restaurants really do approach it that way. They think, they're trusting us with their anniversary, with their special occasion. We want to make it special for them. And it's all about the customer, serving them, helping them have a great experience, helping them have no constraints, helping them, achieve their dreams and their vision. And it's a noble cause. I'm not knocking service at all, but it's a selfless pursuit. It's not about your ego. If your ego is there, it's not going to go very well. As you can kind of see, these two things of excellence and service a lot of times can get into some tension with each other, right? On the one hand, we need money, we need to make a living, and we want to pursue our art. And so we enter into this tension. And so excellence demands pure ideas. It's about my goals, my agenda. And when things go well, I get the recognition, right? That was a great painting. That was a great photograph. That was a great video, whatever. You get the attention when things go well. On the other hand, service is about the client's ideas. It's about their goals, their agenda. And when things go well, then the client gets the recognition. Now, this is just a couple of ways that service and excellence fall into tension with each other. In the video world and creating videos, a lot of times clients, they come to us and they have a business goal, right? They want to get more customers. They want to get an idea out there. And they're relying on us to bring creativity in how to do that. But a lot of times the way this tension looks is they'll say, okay, let's tell a story. Yeah, we love storytelling. Now we need to say like these 10 talking points. And I'm going, okay, well, those are like business talking points about how this product or service is going to make you better, but those are not storytelling talking points. And so in order to build narrative lift, we have to figure out a way to work those talking points into the story in a natural way, and not just like basically, I think a lot of times what the client ultimately wants is a PowerPoint. And I've literally had people where clients where at the end of the day, like we could have just made a PowerPoint and that would have been the video, and it skewed way away from excellence. And in my idea as a failure, I think the client maybe liked it, but this tension is real. And so I wanted to jump in, give us a chance to talk about what are some of the ways that you've experienced this tension in your professional life.
Yes.
Everybody hear me? Okay, great. So I don't know about your breakout room, but that we had some great stories, more classic than I could even have hoped for. The client who wants a really authentic testimonial and then has 15 things that they want the person to say exactly how they worded it so that legal will approve it. That is tension right there. So what I want to share in this last part, and this is going to be fairly short because I really want to get into Q&A so we can dig in a little deeper, is some tools for tension. And these tools come from storytelling. So the first tool is maybe for those who are on the spectrum more of like really caring about excellence, and might find themselves more relating to the artist who's like, this is my idea and you will not trample on it. So think about if you're on that side of the spectrum of the idea of excellence and service, think about your client from a point of view of a story. So in a story, there's always a protagonist, the hero, and they are out they want something, right? They're out to get something, and along the way, they find obstacles in achieving that. And so think about that from the point of view. Ask yourself, what is it that they want? And it's probably going to be hard for you in the first step to come up with that. So you're going to have to ask them. Like, you could just literally ask them, or you could just go circumvent with some questions to try to get at what it is that they want, and then listen. And I'm not talking about kind of like the superficial wants, like they want you to change the color to pink. That's not what we're talking about. We're thinking about on the deeper level, what is it that they really want? Like a lot of times, you're working for somebody and they have a boss or two bosses, and they just want to impress their boss. They want to make sure that the things, go well in the project so that they get recognition. And, you can call that superficial or not, but that may be the reality. And so how can you help them do that? How can you help them shine? It may be that they really just want to get that business goal. They want to get numbers going up. And so how can you do that? And letting them know that you're behind them in that is what can help build trust. And so once you have trust, well, first of all, if you don't have trust, then it doesn't matter how excellent you are, how much expertise you have, how great your ideas are, they're not going to trust you to implement those. And so by building trust, then you have an opportunity to guide them to excellence. So maybe they're starting in one place and you can pull them a little closer. You're probably not going to pull them all the way to what you consider A+ excellent, but you can pull them in the right direction to a better place. And then the next project, you can pull them to the next place. And I have a story about that. So I had a client who's still a client. And when they first started out, I mean, we were doing boring videos. It was not fun. And I considered dropping them. My employees were just protesting. They did not want to work for this client. But we pulled them little by little by each project. And so after about 3 projects, we came to them and said, what if we did this? and we had this idea to do a reality show style cook-off video for their annual chili cook-off, and it turned out awesome. And our client like showed it to his senior leadership. Everybody was rolling on the floor, and this is not a company you would think would be into like reality humor, and it worked. And so that paid off because we had built the trust doing some of the boring projects, pulling them a little bit closer each time, and we were able to then spend some of the cred that we had with them, and it paid off. So that's the first tool, is to have empathy for where they're coming from. Now, it's not going to solve everything, but it's going to help you understand where they're coming from, right? And understand the challenges that they're facing, how busy they are, how many other things that they're juggling in their world, right? Like they're not just thinking about this project. They have so many other things going on. All right. So the other tool that, if you're on the other side of the spectrum, so if you're someone, and this is kind of more where I'm at, if you're someone who already has a lot of empathy for your customer and doesn't really like conflict a whole lot, then you need to practice authority. And so authority can be kind of a nasty word in our culture. You know, it's like disobey authority and don't tell me what to do. Kind of, we have that in our culture. But in the context of serving a client, authority is important because you have expertise. You've been doing this for however many years. You have knowledge that your client doesn't have. But if you don't communicate that you have that in a way that they can get it, then it doesn't count for anything, right? And so you have to think about, you're probably already thinking about what your client wants, but you need to think about what it is that you want, okay? Like, what is it you want out of this project? Is it that you would really like to try a new technology or a new platform or something that will give you, kind of scratch your itch to learn new things? That's one thing I love about taking on a project is, oh, we're going to get to use this different camera or this different filming technique. But state it clearly. This goes to everything from, the creativity involved in the project to the deadlines and how it's going to flow. And the second thing I would say along this lines is to follow your process, which you define. Okay, if you don't have, you probably do have a process, even if you haven't defined it, but take the time to write it out and communicate that to your client as you start the project. It's like, hey, this is the process. We're going to do discovery, and then I'm going to invoice you for that, or whatever it is, right? Follow the process that you define, because that then allows them to see that, like, oh yeah, they have a process and they're going to respect where you're coming from. A lot of times, I know one of my most fearful moments is hitting send on a proposal. I love making proposals. Actually, I do really fun creative proposals. It's great. But the sending part just drives me nuts because I'm worried that they're going to not like it, in the sense of like, it's too much money, or basically it's too much money. It's the thing I worry about every time. They're like, are they going to pay for this? Will they go for this? But in the process, I've learned to just define what it is. These are the prices, these are the fees. And don't necessarily, you can compromise, but don't just throw it away, right? Like if it is too expensive, you can say, well, we can take these things away and we can make it more affordable. Instead of the temptation, I know for sure, is, well, I make up the rules. It's just me. I'll just do it. I'll just do it. It's fine. And that you've lost authority there. And the important reason to have authority is because you want to help your client do something excellent, right? You want to help them achieve their goals, and how to help them get there. And if it's not excellent, it's not going to work, right? Like going back to the story with a client with a testimonial, and they want them to say 15 things. That if you just come on camera and you say, can you read these 15 things? That's not going to work. No one's going to believe it. It's going to be a terrible testimonial, and it's going to actually work against them, and then they're going to blame you. So it really is on you to build the authority so that you can bring your client into a place to do something that's excellent and it's actually going to achieve what they hope to achieve. So those are my two big things around empathy and authority. When you have that, then you are actually the perfect guide. And the hero along their journey, they always meet a guide because they need guidance, they need help. And so the guide offers empathy and authority in helping the hero get to where it is that they want to do. And then everyone walks off into the sunset. You've made a living, they've made a living, and everyone's happy. I would love to hear your questions, and we can dig into even more of the nitty gritty.
Where does your passion for storytelling come from, Nathan?
That's a great story. So I went to journalism school at Carolina, not because I wanted to be a storyteller. I just wanted the skills. I wanted to be a photographer, and I was interested in all the other things that fell into the bucket of multimedia, and that's what they had. But along the way, every project we did had the word story in it. So like we had Chiloé stories and Galicia stories, and so I was just like, wow, this is really cool. And I learned how to tell a story in photos, which is about capturing a moment and whatever's going on. And the idea of story just got embedded in me. But then as I got into marketing, I started trying to figure out, like, why is it that stories actually work? Like, it's one thing to be able to make somebody cry, but like, how do you do that repeatedly? How do you, get to that place more often than just lucking into it? And so I started just researching on my own into the neuroscience behind stories, what they do in your brain, what tension does. And I learned some really super interesting stuff about oxytocin, dopamine, all the things in our brains that keep our attention and make us feel empathy with a product or with a person.
So what are the most important parts and aspects of a story that are needed in order to get across to a client?
Let me make sure I understand. So what are the important aspects of a story
that a story needs in order to get across to a client?
Okay. In order to serve a client, maybe, is that, I think?
Maybe.
Okay. So I think the biggest thing is tension. You need tension. And this is where clients have the hardest time, is they don't want to talk about anything negative because they're afraid that negativity is going to be associated with their brand. But in order to have tension in a story, you need to have a high and a low. And so if all you talk about is the great, 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 then you don't have anything to compare it with the low. And so it doesn't feel that great. Whereas if you talk about the low of the story, the things that almost didn't make it, then you have an opportunity to build that tension. And the tension, actually, talking about dopamine, is when we have a story tension, our brains are literally wired to want to figure out more, to figure out, like, okay, how does this resolve? For instance, I'm not into reality shows, but if I stumble upon or like walk into a room and somebody's watching like Keeping Up with the Kardashians or something, as soon as that they know that loop, right? All the reality shows know that, and that's why, as terrible as it can be, you want to find out. So even if I don't care about Kim Kardashian or any of her family, as soon as I find out, like, oh, she walked into this place and there's the paparazzi, what's going to happen? I'm hooked on that at that point, even though I ultimately don't care, but my brain is wired to find out. So if you can introduce that question that needs an answer, then you've got your audience hooked, and you have a chance to keep their attention long enough to insert those brand messages that your client really wants.
Kind of building on that Kim Kardashian reality, you're really surprising me here with that inspiration. But one of the questions is, what content do you consume to get ideas for stories?
That's a great question. I have been on TikTok a lot recently. Particularly, I'm not as much into the dancing videos and stuff, but there's a lot of people who do cooking stuff, and I just love it. Because there's a built-in tension there. They start off and you're not really sure what they're going to make or if it's going to work out. And it's a very short format, and it's very entertaining. I'm forgetting everybody's name, but there's a couple people on there that I just adore.
What advice would you give to creatives who are younger and less experienced in regards to gaining authority and trust? I think Christian here shares that the knowledge is there, but the inexperience makes it hard to convince others sometimes.
Yeah. I think you probably experience what I've experienced and haven't really gotten away from, is just the idea of imposter syndrome, that, especially if you're working for a company that's pretty big or whatever, they're like, oh, they seem to know what's going on. Do I really know what's going on? Am I really an expert? And I think that humility is a great place to start, to admit what you don't know, in a way that fosters trust, not in a way that sort of makes them think maybe we hired the wrong person. But honesty, one of the ways you build trust is to be really honest. And like Vishali and I talked about, even in preparing for this talk, you want to be vulnerable because it builds trust with your audience. And so it's okay to say, I don't know. Or if they ask a question, to say like, let me do some more research on that and I'll get back to you. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be an expert on everything. Just start with where you're at and be, I think if you show that you are going to hustle for them and you're going to really go to the extra mile, then you've built the trust that you need to gain the experience. Another thing I'll say is just the idea of Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. You just got to put in time. You just got to do it. Do as many projects as you can. Treat every project like you're working for your ideal client, even if they're not, and just try to knock everything out of the park.
I think one of the things that's really interesting about what you just mentioned about Malcolm Gladwell, connected back to what you said about authority, is this idea of like knowing what you want and having a process. And so many like that, the practice that you put into those 10,000 hours is so important, and just kind of random. But do you find that to be true? Like I'm curious how you connect those 10,000 hours to like what you said about authority. And how, like, having a process, like, what does that look like as a creative? Is that really important, what those 10,000 hours look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the 10,000 hours, it helps you understand, you see the same patterns over and over again with clients and what they need. And so you can anticipate their needs more. You can have ways to solve their problems. You can develop specific offerings even that fits perfectly into their problem, and so that they really see you as a trusted person. And it's hard to know an industry well without that time. Now you could get that in a different way if you worked in that industry for a long time and then switched to actually being a service provider in that industry. Then you would know a lot. You'd be definitely way ahead. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Someone was asking, would you advise a nonprofit storytelling effort differently versus a commercial?
Yeah, nonprofits are usually have better stories, because they're serving the underdog in a lot of scenarios, and people love to see, a story where someone goes from really suffering to doing great. Those are the underdog stories. So I think that the challenge with nonprofits is usually they just don't have the same budget, and so that's just another tension. It's another constraint that excellence wants to throw away, but has to deal with, is we don't have a lot of budget for this. How are we going to do it in a way that is excellent and tells a great story? So one of the things that I've found that was really helpful as a freelancer, and then even as a business owner, is I have 3 criteria. One is it a good story? So is there potential for excellence high? Is it a good client to work with, in the sense of like we're going to have a good working relationship? Are they going to treat me well? Am I going to be excited to get on a phone call or an email or a Zoom with them? And then do they have good budget? And really, you need 2 of the 3 to make a good project. 1, it generally is never going to cut it. If you have 0, then just run the other way. If you have all 3, you are a unicorn. Celebrate and dance. That rarely happens, but it does sometimes. But I find if you have 2 of the 3, then it's fine. Like, for instance, if you have a client who has great budget, and they're awesome to work with, but their stories end up kind of sucking. You're like, well, you know, at the end of the day, that was a good experience because they're fun to work with and they're paying the bills really well. Whereas if you have a client who's a jerk and is super cheap and wants to like fight you on every budget line and their stories suck, then just run away. Like drop that as fast as you can. It's probably not gonna work out.
Gina's interested to know, is a sad emotion equally empowering as a happy tension for the audience to respond to?
That's a great question. From a scientific point of view, I don't have anything to offer there in terms of, you know, does one lead to more action on the call to action? I'd have to do more research on that. That's really interesting. But they're different. I mean, we both experience those things differently. But I think the important thing is to build empathy in the viewer, which is the same kind of gut level place where we make decisions. And so I think if you're speaking to that gut, whether it's through a sad story or a more upbeat, exciting story, I think either way you've hit a home run. We call it when someone cries in a video, we call that a cry five. It means that we took them on the journey that we needed them to go on, and they were able to achieve liftoff, which is narrative transportation, to take them to another place and really experience something that they wouldn't have experienced otherwise.
Thinking back to your presentation and the theme of spectrum, I think one of the challenges especially in thinking about like, how do you embrace this opportunity there is to step outside of like your own perspective and have that story to be more inclusive of the expansive ideas that you hadn't considered. How important do you think it is for creatives to build that skill? And like, what do you think are some of the biggest barriers to being able to build that empathy that people have to overcome?
Part of it, I think, is just people are wired different. You know, there's some people who are empaths, right? And they just immediately feel what someone else is feeling, and they even have to learn how to navigate that, right? So that they don't just get absorbed by someone else's experience. And there's people who are the opposite, who, you know, are just don't seem to care at all about what other people are feeling and kind of move on. But I do think it's important to land somewhere in the middle where you can still have your own sense of identity and purpose and goals and purpose in the world, but to come alongside somebody and find the commonality. I think empathy is really about finding commonality. We're always just comparing things to how we see it, right? That's just kind of how we are wired. Okay, oh, that's how I see it. How do you see it? So then to find that commonality as a place to then, you know, be human together, walking around in this world instead of being opposed to each other. You know, I think that's a challenging thing to do during an election year, for sure. And I would challenge y'all to try to see what you can do with that. You know, like, don't walk into a conversation with somebody you know that doesn't agree with you politically without having a preconceived notion of what it is that they want. But try to figure that out. What is it that they really want? And you might find that we really want the same things. We just have a different philosophy about how to go about it. And so then you can kind of talk about ideas, just talking about like, I can't stand you as a person. Doesn't mean all those conversations are going to go great. So don't blame me when, you know, you get into a fight, but it's definitely helps, I think, to think through those ideas of empathy for the other person especially in a political situation.
Do you find that there's a big difference in telling a story, a written story versus a story that's like in a magazine versus telling it via video or photo? Like, what are kind of the differences, or are there a lot of commonalities?
They're different in how you execute them, and they're different in how you would go about collecting the information. But really, it's very similar in the sense of you want to introduce, you want to make sure that the person knows what the hero wants, what the protagonist really wants, and you want to create some tension and then resolve that tension and talk about your main message as you do that. So I've had a chance to do a lot of videos, but I've also had a chance to write. I'm not writing isn't necessarily my strongest suit, but yeah, it's different. It's interesting. It is different, but it's mostly similar, I would say.